Good evening, Ralph.
Good evening.
Hello, Simon. Simon's always on time.
Hello.
I'm glad to see Simon with us.
It's pathological. What can I do?
That's a good pathology to have.
Very good pathology. I wish more people had that pathology. Wow, everyone's coming in. Great timing, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Welcome, Lily Naz, Jamal, welcome again. Betsy, Sol, Mr. Garson. Noah, welcome. Zev, great to have you again. Michael, Ohad, thank you for helping me just a minute ago. Felix, welcome. Joseph, is it snowing? A little bit.
It was, not anymore.
Just like us in London yesterday. Great, we'll just give a couple of minutes for everyone to come through. Rav, do you want to make me co-host? Oh, you have already. Thank you. And welcome, welcome, welcome. Hefziba, welcome. Rav Phillips, good to see you again. Rav Arasi from JLE, great to see you. Where's Avi? Just so I can make him co-host while I let people in, or I'll just do that with
Isaac Dweck.
Isaac, welcome.
Hi.
Hi. Everybody wants to be behind the darkness.
Yeah, come on, guys.
Shows
Ladies. Cameras, please, cameras.
Away from the dark side of the force.
I see. We work with them too.
Welcome, Mr. Bachor. Asaf, welcome. Great to see everybody. Michael, Avi, I'm going to make you co-host just so that you can let people in while I do the intro, if that's okay.
Sure, no problem.
I think the Rav needs to make you co-host. I don't think I'm able to actually. Rav, can you do that, please?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Avi, I lost him. Oh, there he is. There you are, Avi.
Hi, Rabbi. Good to see you.
You too, sir.
Welcome, everybody. Okay. Let me see here. Right. Just a minute. Great. Welcome, everybody. Great to have you all back for part 2 of the Thoughts of Hakham Gaguine by Hakham Joseph Dweck. Great to see you all again. Not much housekeeping this week, actually, just like last week. Things are developing very nicely. We'll be coming back with some very, very exciting updates soon. Got a very interesting start to the shiur, very, emotional start.
And moving start.
Very, very moving. I have to say, I received a message yesterday from a gentleman in Australia who is the grandson of Hakham Gaguine. And he messaged me saying that he was made aware of a series that's happening at the Chabura, which teaches some of the Hacham's works, and that his mother, which is the daughter of Hakham Gaguine, was very, very moved to listen to the shiur. And I asked if there's a clip, something we could get from the daughter of Hakham Gaguine, Fortune Gaguine. And he went to visit her today, and kindly a video message was prepared for Rabbi Dweck and the Chabura. And it's the Queen's English. You can really get a taste of the kind of milieu that Hakham Gaguine was amidst. And I'm going to play
96 years old, mashallah.
96.
96, she's the youngest daughter.
She is indeed. And he also sent some beautiful pictures and some manuscripts, and he will be sending some other manuscripts of unknown works, unpublished works that please God, when we have a publishing house with the Bet Midrash, that's something that we're planning, we can work on. So I'm going to just quickly share screen, show you a couple of the pictures that were sent. The Rav, if you want to do some commentating on the pictures, then I'm going to quickly play the 2-minute clip that Fortune Gaguine, the youngest daughter of Hakham Gaguine, kindly sent us. Okay, let's see. Where are the pictures? Here we go. So here are some actual manuscripts.
So take a look. This is the Hacham's actual handwriting. he wrote out, he drew out the opening of the book, the Sha'ar, the title page, and that's his handwriting. Let's make it. Can you make it any bigger?
Absolutely. Let me just
Let's
zoom
look
in.
at his handwriting. So he actually laid out the whole book, as you can see, right? So if you look underneath the top, it says, Madua nahagu b'nei Israel. That's the halacha or the minhag. Well, here he's asking reasons for why it is that we do certain things, and below that he's writing essentially in Rashi script. And that was the minhag of many of the Sfaradim to write like that. This is not what they call nus alam, which means hatzi kolmos, or half pen or half pencil. That's a different kind of script. This is more Rashi type of script. But you can see, so he's writing the footnotes in the bottom, and he crossed out, or this was published or taken. But it's beautiful, and he has the margin. That's him. How old is he in this picture?
I wasn't saying, you just said as a boy.
Little boy.
Yeah.
A little boy. That's him and his wife. That's a more famous picture of him, you can see. That's a wedding, I think, at Ramsgate. That's him when he's older. Yeah, he's older there on the right. Wearing a tuxedo and his signature in English.
Right. So that's what we've received from images so far. And please God, we'll be receiving many more and some of the teshuvot and manuscripts. And here is the video from Fortune Gaguine, and you will hear the grandson of Hakham Gaguine in the background.
It's her son.
It's her son, exactly. So I would recommend everybody to make sure they're silent, because it's a little bit hard to hear. If you can get closer to the microphone, to the speaker, just so you could hear, you're going to hear some of the finest of Queen's English.
Good evening, Rabbi Dweck. It's a great pleasure to listen to a lot of your work on my computer. I couldn't do it without my son David, who understands computers far more than I do. So it's a wonderful thing. And not only that, but I've listened to your words translated from the Hebrew, and a lot of it I never knew. So I'm thrilled to bits that I heard more about my father than anybody could tell me. And my father himself really didn't talk to us about what he was doing or so on, but he loved us. I know he loved us. He was a marvelous father, and he enjoyed thoroughly being a rabbi of the synagogue and the college there.
Say who you are, Mum. Your name.
My name is Fortune Gaguine, originally, Pop's youngest daughter. We were 7 children, and we had 5 girls and 2 boys, and we all loved him, and he was very jolly in many ways, of course serious in others when he was working. He didn't want anybody to interrupt him because he was working very hard at his desk, and we knew that, and he had books all over, bookcases, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I can remember now about 7 or 8 bookcases in his library, and he was thrilled to have them, and he had them, looked at them to probably investigate the work that he wanted to do. So we were very thrilled.
Just God bless the congregation.
So nice to speak to you, Rabbi, and God bless you, and look after yourself, and how lovely that you've written this about my father after his death 70 years ago. And it's wonderful, actually. I'm feeling very, very thrilled, and thank you for taking an interest in my father. God.
There we go.
I have to say, it's still, I saw it, this is I think the third time that I'm watching. It's still so moving to see. I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful. Amazing. She's 96.
Unbelievable.
Amazing. So, but it's so nice to hear not only, the description of the Hakham, but she remembers, as a child, what he was doing. There was a lot of books that he didn't talk about what he was doing, and for her to hear, what he was writing. And so it's very moving, and I'm very grateful for that. Very grateful. So it's good.
Thank you, Hakham. The stage is yours. All
right, everyone. Welcome. It's good to see everyone tonight, and I'm glad to be able to spend the hour with you. I've decided tonight that instead of doing some of the fiery stuff as I promised, because you already got a taste of it, I want to do one whole treatment of a particular issue that the Hakham deals with. And you see very much in this treatment the manner in which he thinks and the way that he dealt with it. And this tonight is the question of Birkat Kohanim with the Kahal. and in general, the idea of Birkat Kohanim among the Sephardim, and for that matter, among the Ashkenazim. And so he addresses it in his Keter Shem Tov, because he, of course, it's part of the daily service, or it's question as to whether it should be part of the daily service. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at the Hacham's treatment tonight of Birkat Kohanim. And in this, you'll also see that there was some very serious issues around it in Amsterdam, connected to Shabtai Tzvi and the congregation there. And he's going to mention Hakham Yaakov Sasportas, who was a Hakham in Amsterdam, and he was the first Hakham here of the community in London. And there were issues around that. So without further ado, let's get started on the issue. And here it is. So we're going to be doing a lot of text tonight. We're going to be reading a lot tonight, so bear with me. But here is the issue. I'll make it a bit bigger. Is that good? Everybody can see. So again, his nice little rhyme. Birkat Kohanim yekara mipeninim. Now he says that the Birkat Kohanim is more precious than pearls, and of course that's a pulling from the pasuk. He always takes from the Pesukim and plays on them, but he says it. He makes a strong statement saying it's more precious than pearls, the Birkat Kohanim, not to be treated lightly. And he opens and he says, "Minhag beLondon, the custom in London, Birkat Kohanim ne'emeret mepi hashliach tzibur." It is said by the shliach tzibur, and what that means is that it's not done. Right? In other words, the Kohanim don't go up to the to the Hechal, to bless the Kahal in London. Rather, the Hazan, the Shliach Sibur, says the Birkat Kohanim. At the point in the Amidah, when he's repeating the Amidah, the Hazan says, Eloheinu v'avoteinu barachenu baracha mishuleshet b'Torah keduva ad Moshe abdech. Chutz, that's the way that it's done in London every day, except Miyamim Tobim, on the Yamim Tobim themselves, the Shaloshet Regalim, Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. Shekohanim actually nosim kapehem. On those days, on the Yamim Tobim, the Kohanim go up and they do Birkat Kohanim. Today, in London, the minhag in our kehilot, in all of our kehilot of London, because there was a vote of the community, of the Yehidim, we do Birkat Kohanim on Shabbat as well, which I'll mention towards the end as to why it is that happened. We have to have a little addendum here to the Keter Shem Tov of the modern iteration of the halacha that was voted upon by the whole kahal. Minhag Amsterdam, the custom of Amsterdam, shegam b'Shabbat, hakohanim nosim kapehem, they do it on the Yamim Tovim plus Shabbat, right? V'chen minhag ba'arei Morocco, and so too is the minhag in the cities of Morocco to do Birkat Kohanim on the Yamim Tovim and Shabbat. Aval be'Eretz Yisrael, Usuria Turgamar Mitzrayim, in Eretz Yisrael in the eastern countries, Noagim HaKohanim Lisa Kapehem Bechol Yom. The Kohanim have the minhag to do Birkat Kohanim, to raise their hands and bless the Kahal every day. Uminhag Ashkenaz Rak B'Yom Tov. The minhag with Ashkenazim is only on the Yamim Tovim, meaning excluding Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Ashkenazim shenitiyashvu be'Eretz Yisrael. However, the Ashkenazim that live in Eretz Yisrael naharu achar minhag Sfaradim she'akohanim nosim kapehem bechol yom. They flowed together with the minhag of the Sfaradim who are already in Eretz Yisrael to do Birkat Kohanim every single day, which the Ashkenazim, most of the Ashkenazim in Eretz Yisrael do. V'chen minhag anshe Teman, and so too the Yemenite Jews say Birkat Kohanim every day. So now let's go down to the footnote. We're going to be in the footnote for the rest of the time. So he wants to unpack this, right? He wants to unpack the issue of Birkat Kohanim itself. Why is there a discrepancy with this? Yeah, why is there an issue with this where people are not necessarily just doing it in a uniform way? So he says, look, Haminhag ha'atik she'akohanim hayu mevarechim b'chol yom. The old minhag in Israel, the ancient minhag in Israel, was that the Kohanim said Birkat Kohanim every day. It's explicit in the Mishnah, but that's what they used to do. They would do it in the Mikdash, and they would do it in the Bet Knesset. Because man sheyesh asara Bet Knesset mevarechin, anytime, the only prerequisite you needed a minyan for Birkat Kohanim. There was a minyan, they did Birkat Kohanim.
Did Rabbi scroll down?
What?
I scroll up, sorry.
This is as much as I can do. You should be able to see. Can you see over here? B'chol Kohen?
Yeah, we can see.
Within the frame. B'chol Kohen she'eno oleh ladukhan, over b'shalosh aseh. Any Kohen who does not go up to the Dukhan, the Hachamim say he transgresses 3 positive commandments. In reality, it's not actually 3 positive commandments. It's just that the command uses commanding terms, and so 3 times in the pasuk. But of course, Peresh Rambam and Pasak Rambam Berchot Nesiot Kapayim in the laws of Birkat Kohanim, Katav Shu Ke'over b'shalosh aseh. It's as if, because it's severe, it's given very strongly over in the Torah, it's reinforced. But Mishum Dereka Tzivuy Elakote Baruch Hu. The reality is it's only 1 mitzvah, and that's why it's Ke-shalosh, like 3, but not really 3. There's really only 1 mitzvah, and that is Kote Baruch Hu. This is how you bless. HaChinuch, also counting the mitzvot, in mitzvah Shin Samechet, Katav Shenistavu HaKohanim Shevarchu Et Yisrael B'chol Yom. He says that the beracha is a commandment to be carried out every day, that the Kohanim have to do. Upeska Tur v'Shulchan Aruch b'Orach Hayim, and so too the Tur and Shulchan Aruch or Posek, that's the mitzvah that's supposed to be done daily in Shulchan Aruch. V'zeh l'shonam. Haminhag, notice what they say though, in the Shulchan Aruch. Haminhag, the custom. Lisa kapehem b'shachrit u'musaf u'ne'ilah b'yom sheyesh bo ne'ilah. The custom is to do the Birkat Kohanim. Lisa kapehem literally means to raise their hands, to raise their palms, as the Birkat Kohanim. In shachrit and in musaf and ne'ilah. That's when Birkat Kohanim is normally done. And of course, ne'ilah is on days that we have ne'ilah, like Yom Kippur and Ma'amadot were special days of fasting and prayer that were instituted at times that were necessary. But we don't do Birkat Kohanim at Minha time. And the reason we don't do Birkat Kohanim at Minha time, which is towards the end of the day, is the Shechich HaShechrut. Why? Because people tend to drink with lunch. And so you'll have a drink, and you don't want Kohanim that are pasul for avodah doing Birkat Kohanim. A Kohen that drinks or eats wine is pasul for avodah. There's an interesting thing my father-in-law says, is totally parenthetical, that there were some poskim who held that the mitzvah to give, or the halacha to give the Kohen aliyat Kohen only applied at Shachrit and not in Minha later in the day. And the reason is because the Kohen probably drank in the middle of the day. And if he drank, then he's pasul for avodah. And if he's pasul for avodah, then there's no mitzvah of a kiddashto, and therefore you don't have to worry about giving him an aliyah. That's not the case. But some poskim wrote that. Still, the mitzvah of darkei shalom, and not to get the Kohanim angry because they're very easily angered, should remain intact. So just keep it as it's supposed to be. Okay, the Bet Yosef, Sof Siman Kov Chafhet. At the end of Siman Kov Chafhet, he writes, Dibur Anchol Katuv Od Shem Mordechai, Shibulei Aleket, B'Shem Ribar Yehuda. This is now the Bet Yosef. The Kohen Panui Eno Noseh Et Kapav. A single Kohen, a Kohen that's not married, should not do Birkat Kohanim. Ki Asharui Bilo Isha, Sharui Bilo Simcha. In a minute, you're going to see why this is important, right? He says, what's the reasoning behind it that a single Kohen should not do Birkat Kohanim? Incidentally, that's not the halacha. We allow single Kohanim to do Birkat Kohanim. Maran, the Torah Habayit, in the Bedek Habayit, he says that certainly if there are other Kohanim there, then a Kohen who is not married should be able to do Birkat Kohanim. But today we allow Kohanim to do Birkat Kohanim, whether they're married or not married. The question is, if they're younger than Bar Mitzvah, do they do Birkat Kohanim? And the halacha, we allow them to do Birkat Kohanim with other Kohanim who are older than Bar Mitzvah, but not by themselves. But nonetheless, the reasoning that's given for an individual who is not married to not do Birkat Kohanim is because he doesn't have Simcha, he's not married. And the whole thing around marriage is obviously a Simcha b'm'ono. V'ra'ui l'mvarech sheyesh harui b'simcha. And it is fitting for the one who is blessing to be in a state of happiness. The blessing should be done in happiness. Who's writing this? This is in the name of the Shibulei Aleket, right? And later Aharonim, or later Rishonim, Kaspa Aharonim. ושם בית יוסף דיבור מתחיל כתב הגור, שנשאל על מה אין הכהנים נושאים כפיהם בכל יום מאחר שהוא מצוות עשה. So you can see that even in the Bet Yosef's time, in Maran's time, in the 16th century, there were people who were not doing Birkat Kohanim every single day, mainly the Ashkenazim. we're not doing Birkat Kohanim every day. And they asked the Shibbolei Leket, the Agur, why it is that the Kohanim, don't do Birkat Kohanim every day. And so he answered, and this is the quoting of the Bet Yosef. It's not the Bet Yosef himself. He's quoting the Agur. Heshiv shemenhag Kohanim nitbol kodem. He said, well, look, I mean, the minhag of the Kohanim is that if they're going to do Birkat Kohanim, they like to go to the mikveh first. So, b'chol yom kasher lehem nitbol b'chorif. And in the wintertime, it's tough, it's rough to go to the mikveh in the morning. It's freezing cold every day. And so therefore, they established the minhag to do it only on Yom Tov. They don't do it every day because it's too cold and uncomfortable to go to the mikveh. Not only that, there's also, it bothers them from getting to work. Ad kan neshano, that's the Agur. So what does Maran do with that? He quotes the Agur, and Maran says, Hisig alav, he takes issue with him. Why? Because saying that the reason why the Kohanim don't do Birkat Kohanim is because they need to go and do Tevilah is a Humrah that brings us to Kullah. Why? Who said they have to go to Tevilah? Nobody said the Birkat Kohanim have to go, that the Kohanim have to go to Tevilah before they do Birkat Kohanim. Tanya b'delat Tanya she'arei Tevilah nisiyut kapayim lo uzkara b'Talmud. Nobody ever mentioned this. You've seen the whole Talmud that a Kohen has to go to the mikveh before he does Birkat Kohanim? No, the mitzvah is Birkat Kohanim. That's a mitzvah deoraita. Now they decide to be mahmir, right? To go to Tevilah before they do Birkat Kohanim. And now that they don't want to go to Tevilah, they don't do Birkat Kohanim because they don't go to Tevilah. Because of that, they're going to nullify 3 mitzvot aseh every single day, emphasizing it, of course. It's only one, as we said in the Rambam, but still. That's why you see now why Hakham Gaguine opened it up with that rhyme. Birkat Kohanim yekaram pininim. The Birkat Kohanim is more precious than pearls. So Maran was taking issue with the Agur. Go, what kind of weak reason is that? Because they wanted to go to Tevilah before they go to Birkat Kohanim. Now that they don't go to Tevilah, don't do Birkat Kohanim at all. Whoever said you have to go to Tevilah for Birkat Kohanim? That's a perfect example of a stringency that has led to leniency. Now, it's important to understand here, how do we get out of this? Right? In other words, what's the halachic logistics that allows for us to not do Birkat Kohanim when Kohanim are in synagogue? So that's a legal thing. Why? Because, which is not dealt with over here. He uses that as it's assumed, right, that everybody knows that. But it's important to mention it. The only time that the Kohanim have an obligation to, that's why everything here is minhag. Why nahagu levarech? Say, it's a mitzvah levarech, halacha levarech. Why is it minhag levarech every day? The reason it's minhag levarech every day is because the obligation on the Kohanim is not incumbent upon them. It kicks in only when the kahal ask them to bless. That's when it can. Otherwise, the Kohanim are not obligated to do the bracha. Why? Because it says in the pasuk, by Daber Adonai Moshe lemor, Daber laharon ve'banav lemor, Kode baruch hu b'nei Israel. This is how they should bless b'nei Israel. Amor lahem. Say to them. What does it mean, amor lahem? That's extra. They obviously just said, by Daber Hashem Moshe lemor, Daber laharon ve'banav lemor. What's amor lahem? Again, amor lahem. Amor lahem is that they have to be asked by the kahal to bless, and that the words of the bracha have to be spoken to them and they respond. So it's as if to say, Kohanim, say to us Yivarecha, say to us Adonai, say to us V'yishmerecha. And that's why we do the Birkat Kohanim that way. Therefore, if they are not called, which is why you'll hear anybody who's been in synagogue at the time Birkat Kohanim, you'll hear Kohanim. The Hazan says, why does it say Kohanim? He says that because they're being called on behalf of the Shaliach Sibur, the messenger on behalf of the Sibur, to do the Beracha. If he doesn't call Kohanim, they don't have an obligation to do the Beracha. So that's why the whole question is around minhag. Is it minhag to say the Beracha or not minhag to say the Beracha? And that's why, by the way, if a Kohen doesn't want to say the Beracha, or for whatever reason is not able to say the Beracha, what we say to the Kohen to do is to leave the synagogue. when the Hazan says Kohanim, because if he's not there when he was called, then he doesn't have the obligation to give the beracha. And he can come in, but he can come in immediately after the Hazan says Kohanim and receive the beracha from the other Kohanim. But he has to be outside when the Hazan says Kohanim, because otherwise he's going to be called by the Kohen. I was once talking to the head of the CCJ, the director of the CCJ, the Conference of the Council of Christians and Jews. And he was saying, I was saying that I was explaining to him that a Kohen. He goes, oh, so you're a descendant of Aaron the priest? I said, yes. And he says, do you say the blessing of Aaron? I said, oh, you mean, the blessing of the priests of the, yeah. I said, well, yes, but, and I explained to him this whole thing with the calling and only when we call. And so we don't call, so we don't have to do the bracha. He was listening. He goes, that's so Jewish. Oh, technical thing. In any case, so it's important to understand that, because that's what we're dealing with over here. Otherwise, how could we say we do it every day? We don't do it every day. The question is, how often do we ask the Kohanim to bless us? That's the question. So Maran is saying, do me a favor. What kind of a weak reason is that? Because they don't go to Tevilah? Who asked them to go to Tevilah? And because of that, they're nullifying a positive commandment of the Torah. How many opportunities do you have to fulfill mitzvot aseh deoraita on a daily basis? This is Maran still talking. He says, God bless them, strengthen, more strength to them, literally, to the people of Eretz Israel and the entire Malchut of Mitzrayim, of Egypt. Now, this is Maran testifying to the fact that in the 16th century, Eretz Israel and Egypt and the adjacent areas, and same was true in Syria, they did Birkat Kohanim every day. Nor do they go to the mikveh. They just get about their business. They don't go to the mikveh first. This is a bit of a strange paragraph over here. He says, he's quoting a book, but he puts the parentheses afterwards. He says, so too, in Yemen, it's their minhag to do so, and he sees this from this book, Toldot Tefillah, B'Shem Rabbi Ben Sapir. Dr. Albogen, right, the author of this book, Lo yada, he didn't know Shagam Sfaradim Be'eretz Israel B'Suria U'Togava Mitzrayim and Hagam Ken. He only mentioned the Yemenites. He didn't realize that also in Eretz Israel and Syria and Mitzrayim and so on, they all do it. והחידוש הוא שגם האשכנזים שבאו להתיישב בארץ ישראל חזו בזה כמנהג הספרדים. Not only that, the חידוש is that the Ashkenazim do Birkat Kohanim every day, who came to live in Eretz Israel, following the minhag of the Sfaradim who were already there. שקונים ניסו כפיהם בכל יום. וכתב הרב שבולי הלקט וזה לשונו, ואחד מטה שליח ציבור לומר שים שלום, אם יש שם כהן, עולה לדוכן. אם אין שם כהן, אומר החזן אלוהינו ולאבותינו בין תפילת שחרית, מוסף בין בנעילה ובין חל, אומרים אותו עין שם. So the Shibbolei Aleket says very, very clearly that when it comes time for the Kohen, for the Shliach Tzibur to say Sim Shalom, which means it's right after Hatov Shimcha V'Chana Leodot, in that gap between the two berachot, if there's a Kohen, he should be called to go up to the Duchan. And if there's not a Kohen, then the Shliach Tzibur continues with Eloheinu Ve'Avotenu, and he says those psukim of the Birkat Kohanim. And that's done in Shachrit, which is fitting to do Birkat Kohanim, Musaf, which is befitting to do it, Ne'ilah is fitting to do it, but not in Minha for the reasons that we mentioned before about drinking. והכל בו הביא בשם מדרש כותב אריכות בני ישראל, מלמד ששליח ציבור צריך לומר ברכת כהנים על כל אמירה ואמירה. And so too we find that the Shliach Tzibur is supposed to say Birkat Kohanim with every word, calling the words to the Kohen. And he says further, the Kolbo, Shlomo tiken Birkat Kohanim b'tefillah. He's saying this in the name of the Midrash Koteb Aruch, that Shlomo HaMelech established Birkat Kohanim in the prayer. Because remember, there was no formalized prayer in the Torah. When Torah says, tell Aharon to bless the people, there was no context for it. It was just, there was a mitzvah to bless the people. So he's saying that based on the Midrash, it was Shlomo HaMelech who instituted it into the corpus of Tefillah, in whatever way they had Tefillah at that time. And in the first pasuk that has three words, right? Yivarecha Hashem Yishmerecha, is Keneged the Shalosh Avot. It's nice, it's cute, right? It corresponds to the three forefathers. Why? So that we should remember the Brit that was established with our Avot. Pasuk Sheni Hamisha Tevot. Yair Adonai Panav Elecha V'Choneka. Yeah? The 5 words, Keneged Hamisha Humshe Torah, like the 5 books of the Torah, B'Shkut Avot Nitna Torah. And Pasuk Gimel Sheva Tevot, Yisa Adonai Panav Elecha V'Yasem Lecha Shalom. So those are connected the Shiva Rekeim, the 7 heavens. And we say that the one who lives or resides in the 7th heaven or above the 7 heavens should bless you. So these are nice, hints to things. So he says, look, what we do learn from the kolbo, excuse my thumb over there, what we do learn from the kolbo is that the takana of the Kohanim should go up to the Duchan Mechol Yom, that it should be done every day because Shlomo HaMelech established it in the Tefillah, and that he wanted the Kohanim to bless the people every day. Mechol Yom. So Hakham Gaguine is saying, how do these rabbis just nullify a takana like that? מהרש"ל רבי שלמה לוריה בספר ים של שלמה סוף בבא קמא בקונטרס חלוקי מנהגים כתב בני בבל, the Jews of Babel, the Iraqi Jews, פורסים כפיהם בתעניות ובתשעה באב בערבית. It says that they do birkat kohanim on fast days and on Tisha B'Av and Arvit, which is a big question mark, because whoever does birkat kohanim and Arvit, not sure that that's accurate. And in Mincha they do it in Mincha as well. And people of Eretz Israel only do it in Shachrit of Tisha B'Av. Incidentally, the Eastern Jews do Birkat Kohanim on a fast day also in Mincha. Even though the original takana was not to do it in Mincha, even of a fast day, so that you shouldn't make the mistake on regular days, because you might drink on regular days. And even though you don't drink on fast days, don't do it on fast days because of regular days. Why are people who are already in coming back in when they've been in? Is it just because they're getting stuck? I hope they're not getting thrown out or ejected. Okay, hope so. Cuts up the shiur. Vayem Sefer Manhig, Hilchot Ta'aniyot, Siman Het Ta'anit, and so on. V'Hidushei Ritva, in the Hidushim of the Ritva, Sham, Dimurchei Lacha, Kari, Haidana, Ma'itama Parseh Kani Yadayim Mincha Ta'anita. He says, if you want to know why the Kohanim will do Birkat Kohanim and Mincha, a Ta'anit of a fast day, you could see the Ritva, he deals with it over there. Vayem Sefer Eretz HaHayim, and so on. Now, the Rama, right, Rabbi Moshe Serlash, who essentially is the source, he writes about the Minhag of the Ashkenazim, of course, outside of Eretz Israel. He writes in the Darkei Moshe, he gives a reason why they don't do it every day. He says why. The Rama says, he says, well, the Kohanim are basically worried about their lives in Galut. They don't have time to do Birkat Kohanim. They don't have the mind or focus to do Birkat Kohanim. They're worried about just living and surviving. And because they're just constantly trying to live from one day to the next, they're not really very happy. Remember, so now you understand why at the very beginning we had this thing that was mentioned about this single Kohanim that the Bet Yosef brought, right? Why doesn't a single Kohen do Birkat Kohanim ostensibly? Because they're not happy. So he pulls on that reasoning, the Darkei Moshe. And he says, look, they're not happy. And Shabbat, they're not really happy either. Why? Because they're thinking about their work and their livelihood on Shabbat, even though they're not doing it. They're not really that very happy on Shabbat. Kamo b'Yom Tov, like they are on Yom Tov, because Yom Tov is a whole different story. They come every now and then. It's a big event. Shabbat is every week. You get used to it. And so, not to mention, there's this special mitzvah of simchana on a Yom Tov. And so we can't say that when the Torah commands us to be happy, that we're not happy, and so we're not doing Birkat Kohanim. So we might, it's a little bit too much already, right? So when the Torah says be happy and we're not happy, no, okay. So the Torah said be happy. We work on being happy and we do Birkat Kohanim. But the whole thing is around happiness. And so to Rabbi Mate Moshe. Right? He says, the Rabbi Mate Moshe goes, look, I'm a little bit iffy on the second reason that he gave about bitul melacha, they're not doing their work. Look, hatenach behol, I can get that they're preoccupied on a weekday and they're not able to focus on Birkat Kohanim with any kind of joy. But b'Shabbat, ma'ika lememar, but on Shabbat, you're going to tell me that they've got problems. Why shouldn't they bless the people? ואפילו נאמר, you want to say, בשבתות השנה גם כן טרודים בהרורים על מחייתם. You want to say, look, Shabbat comes every week. They're still worried about their livelihood and how they're going to manage things. Bitul melachtan, they're worried about missing a day of work on Shabbat. But on Yom Tov, they're happy. Then he writes another thing. He says also there's a thing about goyim. What is it? There's some people that don't like to say Birkat Kohanim if goyim are present in the synagogue. So if you have anybody who's there doing any kind of work or whatever it is, and you never know when there's going to be a goy in the synagogue, so better safe than sorry, and don't say the Birkat Kohanim. Right? There's some places they will not allow a goy in at the time of the duchening, as they say. So he says, Devarav ele aharonim ayu be'anai kehidas tuma. So Rav Gaguine is saying, look, the Ramah's words are the Ramah's words. What am I going to say? But this thing about the goyim, says Rav Gaguine, it's like a sealed riddle to me. What is that about? Kimala goyim bazeh. What does this have to do with goyim? Whoever said anything about goyim and Birkat Kohanim? He says, look, I'll be honest. I did find in Sefer Bet Midrash, shekatav im yesh nochri bet haKnesset b'shat Birkat Kohanim. He writes that if there is a non-Jew, a Gentile in the synagogue at the time of Birkat Kohanim, lefi adin yesh levarech. He says, the contrary. You should say the beracha when there's a goy. Why? Not like these people we've heard that will not say Birkat Kohanim sheyesh nochri b'bet haKnesset. And he wrote that in the name of the Hida, the B'Chaim Yosef David Yisrael, who wrote at the end of the Teshuvah Yosef Ometz and Siman Hay. He says, look, en biadi sefer zeh, I don't have the Hidas Yosef Ometz in my library, to le'ayin b'shorshan shel devarim, to see the source of the words that were quoted by the Bet Midrash. And he goes, and the truth is, I don't know why Birkat Kohanim should be different than any other part of the Tefillah, which we don't have a problem with the goyim being there. He says, I saw with my own eyes, po bebet haKnesset shel Ramsgate, here in our synagogue of Ramsgate, shekama pa'amim ba'im goyim v'lochim sidur tefillah. He goes, I saw many times goyim would come into the synagogue at Ramsgate. They would take a sidur off the shelf, our daily and occasional, which always was translated into English. Incidentally, you should know that from day one in our community, the sidurim published by our community were translated into the vernacular. We never printed sidurim without translation, so that people should know what it is that they're saying. The first sidurim were translated into Spanish, and then we translated them into English. And then there were portions that remained in Spanish, some portions in Portuguese, so that we would be able to understand. Till today, when we announce the mitzvot of the Torah, when we call people to say who's opening the Hechal, who's carrying the Sefer, who's doing the bells and bands, and so on, we all do that in Portuguese. We still say it in Portuguese. The reason it was originally done in Portuguese and kept in Portuguese, so people should know when they have a mitzvah. So we say that we know, okay, he's called for the thing, right? So we say so-and-so, abiraos portas do Echal, and so kilebarao Sefer Torah, and the one who has to do the Hagbah, kilevantarao Sefer Torah, the sefansharao Sefer Torah. We call all of those the mitzvot like that. In any case, I just thought that I always thought that it's remarkable and beautiful that the Kahal, from day one, always published translation to the Siddur, so that people should know what they're saying. And it shows you the relationship that the Kahal had to the Tefillah, and that they had to the Kahal. That this was a congregational engagement and not just the engagement of people who are just saying words in order to be able to fulfill a mitzvah. It was very sensitive to the state and mind of the Kahal, always. So he says, look, I've seen Goyim pull Sidurim off the shelves in Ramsgate, and they take it that they're translated to English, umitpalelim mila b'mila, and they pray with us word for word. Ubifrat b'yom kippurim, especially on Kippur. Fascinating. Notice that he didn't throw them out of shul, right? He didn't throw them out of the synagogue. He welcomed them to the synagogue. He said, I saw it with my own eyes. I saw that that's what they do here. He was the Hakham. Ha'ma'ayen, ha'olech b'tzedek. He goes, look, if you look at this stuff realistically and appropriately, and you study it right, yivhan v'yavin, you will see and understand, kitam harama, that the reasoning of the Ramah, dahuk mikol tzad, is difficult on every side. So this is Hakham Gaguine. He's saying, look, if we're being real, if we're going to be honest about this, the Ramah's reasoning, it doesn't fly. It doesn't work. It's really, really difficult. Because look, let's take this idea that he says that on Shabbat people can't have happiness. Okay, happiness, but we have to indulge in joy and delight on Shabbat. It says v'karata Shabbat oneg. You should call Shabbat a delight. So the same way that it says Shabbat should be a delight, as it says on Yom Tov v'samachta b'chagecha, so you can't pretend that you're not delighting on Shabbat. And in the Yerushalmi, the Dat Rabbi Haggai, b'shem Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman, they say in the Yerushalmi, lo netnu Shabbatot v'yomim tovim ela la'achrei ha'shtiyah. The reason why Shabbat and Yom Tov was given, so we should eat and drink and enjoy ourselves. Have some nice time. According to Rabbi Rachia, b'shem Rabbi Chaya bar Ba, lo netnu Shabbatot v'yom tovim ela la'asok b'Torah. The other opinion is that they were given so that we would have time to engage in Torah. He says in Sikta, the opinions are opposite. Onik Shabbat u'echad mishishim le'olam haba. Not only that, the Gemara in Berachot says that the delight of Shabbat is 1/60th of olam haba. These are not small things that we should say the Kohanim shouldn't be in a mindset to bless the people. Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, kol ha'me'aneg Shabbat. Says anybody who delights on Shabbat, they give him all of that all that his heart desires. Not to mention the fact that it says in the Gemara, God gives an extra portion of our soul to us on Shabbat. We feel more alive on Shabbat. Which is not the case on Yom Tov. If that's the case, all of these ma'amarei Hazal, we can't say that all the Kohanim don't feel at least some happiness on Shabbat. Rich and poor, they find a way to make the Shabbat special. As it says in the Gemara, even if it's with a piece of fish and some tradin is either beets or spinach, however it is you translate it, with some garlic, it's something a little bit special, a little bit more special than the regular week. Even if you do something special for Shabbat, that's delight. It's special. Papa says fish sticks. Have some fish sticks, some fried fish, fish and chips on Shabbat, fine. Because that literally means small fried fish. Then the second thing that he wrote, that the Kohanim are always preoccupied with their livelihood and so on, their galut, and because of that, they don't feel really happy. So you're going to tell me what? You're going to tell me that on Yom Tov, they all of a sudden are able to manage their feelings and they can totally dominate themselves and control how they feel on Yom Tov? This is what he says, right? He says, all of a sudden, because it's Yom Tov, magic. They're not going to worry about their livelihood or their parnasa or their life situation anymore. And then because of that, they can do the Birkat Kohanim with Simcha. Please, what are we kidding? Adrabah, to the contrary, Behagim Tigdal Dagato. The holidays are the worst time in the world. Why? You have to pay more to be able to celebrate them. Not only that, he sees his family present, at least during the week. He's out at work. He doesn't have to see their misery in front of him all the time. I don't know. When he's home on Yom Tov, he sees his wife and kids asking for bread. Sho'alim lalehem en la'el yado. He doesn't have enough to provide them, or whatever it is that his wife and kids are asking for. Nowadays, it might not be that they're asking for bread. They're asking for, I don't know, FIFA. What do they ask for nowadays? I don't know what they ask for. Whatever they ask for. Everybody has their own luxuries that they need to have. Give me, I need. That's all. That's what everybody says. So he's saying, like, do me a favor. It's the most miserable situation. What are we kidding? What kind of answers are these? This is a mitzvah deoraita. You can see where he's going. If we're going to be true, and can we please be truthful, he's saying. I mean, the truth is the truth. The mitzvot are not given for states of mind and emotional well-being. Lo pelgura banana. Hachamim didn't differentiate in these things. The truth of the matter is, once you start that trip, you can exempt yourself from a whole lot of mitzvot. He says, the truth is, the minhag of my birthplace, Zion, right? And all of the cities of Eretz Israel, Mitzrayim, and Egypt, and the other cities adjacent, like Halab and Damascus, and those cities and countries around Eretz Israel. The Kohanim had minhag to do Birkat Kohanim every day. So let's not mess around. Notice that he hasn't yet spoken about London and Amsterdam, which he said, remember, only does Birkat Kohanim, on Yom Tov and Rosh Hashanah and Kippur. So he has to address that, of course. But you can see his setup over here is that he's not pleased. He's not pleased with the minhag of London. And he doesn't endorse it. But he writes this. Very interesting. He says, look, the reason why London and Amsterdam, why don't they do it every day? He says, very simple. It's hard for them to get a minyan in the morning. Why? Because because the reality is that there's plenty of them that desecrate Shabbat. Of course, not intentionally. They have to take care of their parnasah, and so they're forced to work on Shabbat. And so it ends up being that, and so then it ends up being that when does everybody come to synagogue? They come to synagogue on Yom Tov. So that the mitzvah Birkat Kohanim is not entirely forgotten from their community. And from the words of the Abu Darham, mashma minhag Sfarad, as a matter of fact, he says, being that we're talking about the Spanish and Portuguese, and it's very interesting because he throws this line at the very end, just as an addendum. He tosses it in there at the end. He says, don't tell me any of this is Spanish, not Spanish, Sfaradi, not Sfaradi. He says, you should recognize that the Abu Darham wrote that the minhag Sfarad, the minhag of Spain, that the Kohanim did Birkat Kohanim every day. So notice, this is his entire treatment of London. He doesn't do what he usually does. What he usually does is he'll go into elaborate defense of the minhagim of the community. Even when he doesn't really understand it, he'll look and find this one, he's not interested. He says, look, I have trouble finding a minyan. And if his reasoning is right, which it may or may not be, well, if we have a situation where we get a minyan every day, which thank goodness we certainly do in at least some of our synagogues, then batel atam, the reason is no longer there. And the reality is that indeed the Kohanim should properly do Birkat Kohanim every single day, even in the Spanish and Portuguese community. Especially since that's the minhag of Spain, that's the minhag of Eretz Israel, that's how Harambam's posek, that's how Maran Shulchan Aruch is posek. There's no reason not to. He says, now look, there's something about Amsterdam. He goes, let me explain to you the situation in Amsterdam. Okay? Situation in Amsterdam is that they have minhag to do it on Shabbat as well. Yeah, so at the time that Hakham Gaguine was writing this, in London, we didn't do it on Shabbat. We only did it on Yom Tov and Rosh Hashanah and Kippur. In Amsterdam, they did it on Shabbat as well. Why did they do it on Amsterdam on Shabbat? Very interesting reason. Says they did it on Shabbat because, not like London, that only does it on Yom Tov. He says the answer to this question is written in the Divrei Hayamim, Divrei Yemei Yisrael. It's written in a history book by Heinrich Graetz. He looked at Graetz's history, which is very famous, well known. The Graetz, by the way, was a student of Rav Shem Raphael Hirsch. There was a whole special situation between the two of them, which we won't get into tonight. He said the reason that they did this in Amsterdam was min hayom sheta'u asfaradim be'Amsterdam ahar mashchiyuto shel Shabtai Tzvi. The Birkat Kohanim that they do in Amsterdam started when the Sfaradim in Amsterdam started to follow the messianic fervor of Shabtai Tzvi. What does one have to do with the other? Amru Torim bekarov na'alet Ziona. The people thought, look, we're going to be going up to Jerusalem soon with Shabtai being the Mashiach and leading us all over there, and we're going to have a Bet Midrash. V'yashuva Kohanim la'avodatam, and the Kohanim are going to start their service again. We better get the ball rolling while we're still here in Amsterdam, and at least have them start the Birkat Kohanim. So they said they should start doing it on Shabbat. One of the reasons that I heard that they do it, and this is recorded, as you'll see later, I'll quote it. Hakham Sasportas in his Teshubot wrote about this in depth, very extensively. And he says the reason they wanted to do it on Shabbat is because his name was Shabtai. And so in his honor, they started to do Birkat Kohanim on Shabbat, which would made it even more contentious. Yeah. So, aval greats, katav ze mipeh shemuah. Now, greats, it's important to understand that when he wrote this in his history book, he wrote it because that's what he heard. Velo yada mekoran shel devarim, but he didn't know the source of the idea. Anochi, but I, he says, le'avat kore, for my love of you, the reader, right? This is Gaguine speaking. He says, because I love you so much. I'm going to put down here the sources faithfully from their origins. You should know that in the year Tafresh Sadi Aleph, Nasati Amsterdama. I went to Amsterdam. Why? I was working on my book, and I wanted to include the Minhagim of Amsterdam. So I went to go see myself what was going on in Amsterdam. Why? I wanted to see what they did, not one from what they wrote. I want to know what they were doing. So I went to go see it with myself. There, I sat with the secretary of the Kahal, and after looking into this issue of Nisiyat Kohanim b'Shabbat, about the Birkat Kohanim on Shabbat, Hir'ali Sefer Ktav Yad, he showed me a handwritten manuscript written in Portuguese. And in this book, Sefer Zeh, I saw it was basically a record, a diary, a journal of the Sfaradim in Amsterdam, of their history, of what happened. And the mehaber was Rabbi David Franco Mendes, Zichrono Livracha. And it was written in this book in 1769, the following. And he records the Portuguese. I'm not going to embarrass myself and try to read the Portuguese. But he says, this is the Hebrew translation of the Portuguese. It says, Tiknu Birkat Kohanim leomro bechol Shabbat. In 1769, he's recording this. He's not saying this is the year that it happened, right? He's recording it in that year. He says they established Birkat Kohanim to be said on Shabbat, which was not the original minhag. Shelo haya milifnim minhag leomro. We only used to say it on Yom Tov, like London. Of course, London followed that minhag of Amsterdam. And every child that was born in the year that we established this minhag to do the Birkat Kohanim on Shabbat was called Shabtai or Natan. We either called our kid Shabtai or Natan, either after Shabtai Tzvi or Natan Azati, who was his right-hand man. Unbelievable. After I looked through, I also found a davar yoter mefurash. I saw it more explicitly recorded in Ohel Yaakov. Ohel Yaakov is the Shelot Shuvot, is the response of Hakham Yaakov Sasportas, who was Hakham, who was well known to be vehemently opposed to Shabtai Tzvi, right? So he dealt with this question because he was asked by the Ma'amad whether they should continue saying the Birkat Kohanim after Shabtai Tzvi was debunked. So there was a she'ela in she'ela 68 and 69 that the Nish'al Me'et Rav David de Mercado, Rabbi David Mercado, asked him about the Kohanim of Shabbat. And his teshubah was to the Bnei Yeshiva. He wrote the teshubah to the people in the Yeshiva of Keter Torah, which was the community's Yeshiva in Amsterdam. And this is what he wrote. She'elatchem hayta birkat Kohanim. Your question about the Kohanim that they have minhag to say on Shabbat Kodesh, al kavanah pniya mut'at, that they established it on mistaken grounds. Why did they establish on mistaken grounds? They established it for Shabtai Tzvi. Yan haberkat kohanim nitkena rak b'yamim tovim b'nei shekulam semachim. Right? I mean, originally the berkat kohanim was only established on Yom Tov because everybody was very happy. It's all chamsas portas. Ume'az shayu Yisrael semachim lebiat Mashiacham. And since we got so happy that the Mashiach was coming, right? Okay. Tiknu le'omra b'Shabbatot. They established that it should be said on Shabbat as well. Ayen shamash shenasav natan. So Hakham Gaguine is saying you could look in the Ohel Yaakov, the whole extent of his back and forth. I read through these teshubot, by the way. There's a whole, and in the first teshubah, he says that it should be stopped. And then he changes his mind in the second teshubah, he says, no, we'll leave it. Hakham says, so he goes to the mahloket, Shiraz ben Bnei Kahal, Shemehem Ayu Rotzim. Some of the Kahal wanted to nullify it, Libatil Berkat Kohanim b'Shabbat. Once they found out Shabtai Tzvi himir dato bedata Islam, once they found out Shabtai Tzvi became a Muslim, they didn't want to hold it anymore. They got disenfranchised, disillusioned. But there were other members of the Kahal that said, look, at least we're doing a mitzvah. You're going to tell us to stop doing a mitzvah? Ubasof, Rabbi Yaakov Bali de Maskana, in the end, Hakham Sasportas came to a final decision, that they should keep it. And the reason why Hakham Sasportas wrote this in the Teshuvah, he says, look, at the end of the day, it's a mitzvah. And I'm not going to tell you to stop a mitzvah, even though it was started under false pretenses or faulty pretenses. And so that's what they do in Amsterdam. Omnam Sefer Kitzur Tzitzat Novel, in his book Kitzur Tzitzat Novel, which was his polemic against Shabtai Tzvi, כתב שהקהל באמסטרדם עודם מתמידים לומר בכל שבת הכהנים ברכתם רק למען שבתאי צבי ועושים כל זה בני שאינם רוצים להתבייש על מה שהאמינו בו שעבר. He says they keep saying the ברכת כהנים on Shabbat and they only do it because they're embarrassed to stop it because it will be too glaring that they did it for the wrong reasons. They don't want to make a big deal about it. So they just want to like quietly keep it going. אבל הם באים במידת חסידות מכיוון שכבר נהגו שהכהנים ברכו ברכת כהנים בכל שבת מיום שנשמעו שמועות ששבתאי צבי יען מקודם לא היו נוהגים בכך. והניסת כהנים הייתה רק בימים טובים, אנשי המעמד רצו לשוב למנהגם הקדום. He says, look, they wanted to keep it, but the Ma'amad wanted to go back to the original minhag and not do it anymore. יען לא רצו שישאר דבר מתמיד. They didn't want to keep it going, כי יהיה להם לדורות הבאים לחטאת קבועה, because they felt that it would be like this monument of embarrassment that they believed in Shabtai Tzvi once upon a time, and that's why, because people ask, why do Birkat Kohanim on Shabbat? When it is due, and it'll be this horrible, embarrassing monument. And so the Ma'amad was embarrassed. They wanted to get rid of it, but the Kahal wanted to keep it. So the Hakham established that they should keep it. And the reason why they kept it is because Chamsas Portas, because he said that you could. Not only that, the real reason he says, I mean, if you ask me, says Hakham Sasportas, the Ma'amad also thinks it takes too long in the Tefillah. So they want to cut the time down. He says, Gam mitam Torah tzibur. Right? It's too much. So they wanted to go back. Look, they said, look, our original minhag anyway wasn't to do it. But the rabbis of Amsterdam at the time all felt that it was a mitzvah. And since we started it, we shouldn't stop it. Appropriately, you're not allowed to stop a mitzvah that you're doing and you're starting to do every day. So he says, look, and this little asterisk that he has over here, it's cute. We're not going to go through it. He goes, look, since I mentioned Hakham Sasportas, I thought I should tell you a little bit about him. So he goes through a whole small biography of Hakham Sasportas on the bottom. You guys could read that. Then he says over here, Natati lefanecha kore na'im. My dear reader, I have given you Mikoran shel Devarim. I've given you the true sources of this minhag of Amsterdam to do Birkat Kohanim on Shabbat. He says his opinion, interestingly, Hakham Gaguine's opinion was that Hakham Sasportas was wrong to keep it. And he said, even though it was a mitzvah, he says a mitzvah that comes from an avera is no good. They shouldn't have done it. He believes that it is a monument to the sin. Amazing. That's Hakham Gaguine, how he feels. He says this is a stain on the history of the Sfaradim that are otherwise filled with splendor and grace. It's a stain. Mahpir, asher irshali maheh, that cannot be removed. It's a terrible blemish and stain that can't be removed, he says. Aval da'atam gedola mida'ati. He goes, but their opinion is greater than mine. So he, in the end, he defers to Hakham Sasportas, but he takes major issue with Hakham Sasportas over here, and he says it was the wrong thing. He should have annulled it because it's a terrible stain. Fascinating, right? So this man was not afraid. He wasn't afraid. He goes, I just want to be complete at the end. I'm going to tell you exactly what's done in terms of when the Birkat Kohanim is done on the days that we said, right? So there are two congregations in London. He says the two congregations of London and Amsterdam with regards to this. First, London, Menagam Kohanim nosim kapeim b'rosh Shana rak b'shachrit. The minhag of London is that the Kohanim only do Birkat Kohanim and Shachrit, velo b'musaf and not in Musaf, and that is indeed our minhag till this day. We do not do Birkat Kohanim and Musaf. B'sudur Amsterdam, and in Amsterdam Rosh Hashanah en zecher lezeh b'siduram, but Amsterdam doesn't have this differentiation between Shachrit and Musaf. But London, one of the reasons for that is because in London we never say Hazara and Musaf. We always say Musaf and Kol Ram. But on Rosh Hashanah, there's a special Musaf, right? We say Hazara, we do say the Hazara, and on Kippur we do. But because we normally never say Hazara for Musaf, we only say it B'Kol Ram, we obviously don't do Birkat Kohanim and Musaf. And so since we never do Birkat Kohanim and Musaf on the Yamim Tovim, we don't do it on Rosh Hashanah and Kippur either. We just keep it out and keep it consistent. So we don't do it. Be'London me'Amsterdam Kohanim nosim ka'amim Yom Kippur Shachrit u'Musaf v'ne'ila avalo b'minha. But on Kippur, because there is a required Hazara of Kippur, and the Hazara of Kippur is different than the silent Amidah of Kippur, we do the Birkat Kohanim and Shachrit in Musaf and in Ne'ilah, but we do not do it in Minha. And that's the minhag of most of the Eastern communities, that they don't do Birkat Kohanim and Minha. Although the halacha is, by the way, that if a Kohen goes up to the Duchan at Minha, you have to do the Birkat Kohanim if he's already there, rather than tell him to get down. In London, the minhag is that Kohanim nosim kabem bepesach Shabbat Sukkot rak b'shachrit v'lo b'musaf. As I said, we only do it in Shachrit. We do not do it in Musaf, and that is our minhag till this day. Why? Because we don't repeat the Amidah. That's why. In Amsterdam, it doesn't mention this. Aval minhag be'eretz Yisrael, v'Suria, togarma Misraim, the minhag of Eretz Yisrael, Syria, and Egypt, and so on. Shekohanim gamken nosim kapehem bemusaf. They do it in Musaf, kedina the Gemara, as the Gemara requires, and so too was posek Maran Shulchan Aruch. And it's possible that in London, I don't have the end of it, he talks about it. In any case, he finishes it there. The minhag today in London is to do Birkat Kohanim on Shabbat. We don't do Birkat Kohanim during the week, but we do Birkat Kohanim on Shabbat. The reason we do Birkat Kohanim on Shabbat is that in the 90s, the Kahal had a strong influx of people who were Hoser B'Tshuvah, and they became very strong in their Teshuvah, and they wanted to do Birkat Kohanim. And they asked and pushed that Birkat Kohanim should be done. And it ended up being that it was brought to a vote to the community itself, right? Because we have a general meeting of the Kahal every year, right? And it was raised by the Kahal, and the Kahal voted to do the Birkat Kohanim on Shabbat. And because the Kahal voted in that setting to do Birkat Kohanim on Shabbat, all of our synagogues do it. So Bevis Marks and Lauderdale Road and Wembley all do Birkat Kohanim on Shabbat because it was established in the Askamot that it should be done on Shabbat. And so that's the minhag today. And that is it. An interesting Teshuvah of the Hakham.
Thank you very much, Rav. Very, very interesting. I love the twists and turns, never knowing where it's going to go. Just a few questions before you go. There was some in the chat. There was one here from Daniel in Texas, Austin, Texas. Welcome. To drop off for a little bit, but why does it seem that following Shabtai Tzvi was more of a sin on Sephardim than Ashkenazim? Did more Sephardic communities choose to follow?
It wasn't more of a sin. It was just that it was so contentious. It was a very heated thing, especially in Amsterdam, because Hakham Sasportas was like a vehement opponent. to Shabtai Tzvi, even before he did the whole Islam thing and whatever it was. So it became a very, very hot issue in that area. It was always a problem in all areas, but it became acutely so in Amsterdam because of Hakham Sasportas. And so people got very, very, ashamed by it and so on and so forth. And since they had this minhag that they established in his name, it became like the thing to hang it on. And so that's why it became a very, very fiery and central thing.
Okay, so it's kind of like that historical about the personalities involved.
No, I mean, it's a nutso thing
Culture.
when you think about it. No, it's a nutso thing when you think about it. I mean, they may have been a little bit more self-conscious about it because they always saw themselves as being a little bit more refined and rational, and so it kind of exposed them. But I mean, the phenomenon of Shabtai Tzvi, I mean, it was nuts. The entire Jewish world, I mean, hook, line, and sinker. From Syria to Poland, they were just, it was unbelievable. I mean, the one interesting thing that comes out of it, or that I find in it, is that we really want the Mashiach pretty badly. But yeah, I mean, it was remarkable.
Any other questions from anybody?
It's funny you ask
recommendations.
Also, we learn from the past, but when is the forgiveness and moving on from past mistake? Like, when do you do that? It's a very interesting thing. On the books, by the way, it comes to mind, coming again from the whole issue of Amsterdam. On the books, officially, I'm not allowed to mention Spinoza from the pulpit because he was put in cherem.
Right.
Yeah, I could get in trouble if anybody wanted to get me in trouble, which they do, but nonetheless, it's still on the books. Yeah.
Joseph, you had a question?
Never learned about the incident of Shabtai Tzvi, although I know kind of what happened. Any recommended readings or something to watch? Maybe the class.
Start with Google and go from there. You'll find it out.
Jacob Dweck has a fantastic book on it that I highly recommend.
That's about Sasportas and his interaction with it. But
Yes. Okay. Noah's just named it. It's Dissident Rabbi, showing Hakham Sasportas as the standalone figure against the Shabtai Tzvi fiasco. Okay, brilliant. Everybody, thank you so much. Rav, fantastic. Thank you so much for giving us an insight into a Hakham from our Mesorah. Really, really beautiful to hear. Literally feeling like we're hearing him speak in the way that you
are. You're just hearing him, unfortunately, in my terrible.
Not in Queen's English,
voice, but nonetheless. Yeah.
But thank you very much for that. Next week, we've got Diane Ofer Livnat here from the Sephardi Bet Din of the United Kingdom, talking about the role of Midrash Halacha, the authority of Midrash Halacha. We're really looking forward to that. It'll be Wednesday, next Wednesday.
Good. So you have Diane Livnat next week. We're on good trajectory. Wonderful to see everyone. Thank you for taking the time to share. And I wish everybody a very happy Tu B'Shvat coming up on Thursday.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Thank you, Rabbi.
A pleasure.